Hello, in this video we're going to be working on the CodeCheck Python Exercises, the assignment Week 8 functions. Let me go into full screen here. Suppose you have a balloon volume function that computes the volume of a balloon with a given width and height. Notice balloon volume is in camel case instead of snake case, which is not typical of Python. Your task is to write a program that prints the original volume of a balloon and shows how the volume changes when you inflate the balloon, first by 1 inch and then by 2 inches in each direction. Rearrange these lines of code to provide a program segment that makes this computation. Print each value as soon as it has been computed. So let's see. I guess we're going to start printing. Let's click start. Probably going to print the original volume before we print a change volume. Probably need to calculate a change before we print a change. We'll probably need to do it by 2 before we, or by 1 before we do it by 2. So we'll put original volume, then we have volume 2. Volume 1 is going to be before original volume, so volume 1 is balloon volume. We're calling a function balloon volume to get that volume, even though we don't necessarily know the formula. And then we're printing that volume. Then volume 2, we're adding by 1, and we're calculating the change. Change is balloon volume. Well, let's see, volume 2. And then change is going to be volume 2 less volume 1. And then we'll print the change once. And then we'll need to initialize the width and the height to some value. And then after we print the first change, which is volume 2 minus volume 1, and then the second change, we just call the function inline. So instead of doing volume 3, we just call the function inline, and so this is volume 3 is this function call minus volume 2 and print the change again. Rearrange the following lines of code to produce a function that computes the volume of a balloon with the given width and height. Not all lines are used in the solution. Note that the volume of an ellipsoid with radii ABC is volume equals 4/3 pi ABC. So that's just a math formula for computing the volume. So 4/3 times A times B times C, except this says times A times C. But we'll see that in this case, this looks like a circle, which means C and B are the same. So we can just use C twice, C times itself, C squared. So that's probably why volume is like this. So it's a function. So a function would have, you would assume to have like function balloon volume, but in Python, weirdly, functions are not called with a keyword function. They're called with a keyword def. So define that particular function name. So balloon volume for width height, we have to take these parameters, or arguments would be the value that you supply into the parameters, but the variable names here themselves, I believe, are called parameters in this case instead of arguments. And then we pass a particular set of arguments into those parameter slots. Now we'll need a constant value. Really, this could be outside as a global value, but we probably want it to be modular so that the definition of pi travels with this function, and we don't rely on global state to make this function work, because we want to be able to move this function around and have it still know the value of pi for the computation. We'll see that, okay, so they gave us the properties with a given width and height. I'm not sure where we're coming up with, okay, width over 2 is this definition, this C/B right here, and then A is the height over 2, half of the diameter of that ellipsoid, or that ellipse, I guess. Ellipsoid would be the solid, ellipse would be the 2D shape. And so we have A and C. We have volume is 4/3 pi ACC. And then we will return volume. We wouldn't want to return width times height because that's not the proper formula. And the rest should just not be used, I believe. And what order we put these in doesn't really matter. These A, C, and pi, I don't think that should matter. And we could have just returned 4/3 pi ACC, but we first put it into a name called volume and then returned that variable. Write a function that hides the characters in a string, yielding the string of equal length where each character is replaced by a star or asterisk. For example, call the hide character secret. It should return SECRET. So the number of stars is 6 because there are 6 letters in secret. Returns a string of asterisks of the same length of a given string. We get the string such as secret. Now it's important that they used the word string here, not str, because str is a reserved word for the type of string. So this would be like string is of type str. I believe this type annotation would be allowed here. I wonder if they'll complain about me changing that. So you would have the variable name called string that is of type str, the string type. And there are lots of ways we could do this. One way is we could just return a star times the number of letters in this. That might be, you might not know the functions that were available or the characteristics of Python to do that. So a really naive approach would be you have a maybe like a hidden underscore string is equal to the empty string, so there's nothing in it. And then you might use some kind of loop. So you could say for ch character in secret or string, which is the unblinded, because strings can be treated like lists. They are just lists of characters. So we get character S, then character E, then character C, and so on. And for that, every time we just actually discard the ch. So a good practice when you're going to discard something is to call it underscore, just underscore like this, or to call it underscore ch, because that indicates to readers of your code that you're not actually using that. Good indication that you probably don't need a for loop in this case, but you can do this, and then you can take your hidden string and you can just plus equals, so append to the end of it. Hidden string equals hidden string plus the asterisk character. And then at the end, we'll have the proper length, and we should just be able to return that hidden string. And it looks like we passed. But this is a bit unnecessary the way that we've done this. So another way we could do this is we could use a built-in higher order function. It's a bit more complex. So the map function will take in the arguments, and actually don't exactly remember the format. So this is a good test of my abilities. I believe the map function basically says, what do you want to return the function here, and then the collection here. So in this case, this would be a list or the characters of the string or something like that. It might be the opposite order, to be honest, I don't remember. So the function would be, we could use a lambda function here. And this is a, lambda function could be defined as a def, just like that. So for example, we could have def always return star, and that's just going to return the star character. So another way to write this function is lambda always return star equals lambda nothing. We don't need an x argument, so lambda nothing return asterisk. So instead of saying always return star is a star, it's a function that is called with no parameters, or no arguments, sorry, and it always returns star no matter what, but we can call it over and over again. And then what we would do is, so we don't need this one anymore because we replaced it with the lambda function a little bit more concise. We're going to say map the string. So our string, I believe, is in the second position. That's the collection. And the function, we're going to replace any given character. We're going to replace it using the function always return star. And notice we're not putting the parentheses because we don't want to call the function immediately. We want to provide the map function, the function name always return star, so that it can call it over and over again on each character of the string. That's what the map function does. So we may have to do something else, but let's just see if it will let us return map always return star. I'm almost positive this won't work because our result is going to need to be a string, which I think would be annotated by a type annotation like this, saying this function should return a string, and it says here return a string. So I believe this is going to return, weirdly, a map object. It doesn't return the original thing, so this was a string. It's not going to return a string. It's going to return a map object on a string, which is confusing. So there are a couple different ways you can turn it back into a string, but one of them would be you can wrap it in a list. So you wrap it in a list. So this turns it into a list of characters, but a list of characters is still not a string. So then you have to wrap that. I'm just highlighting and using the Shift 9 or the open paren to wrap that, the highlighted portion in parentheses. And then that just keeps me from having to move my cursor. Then I'll do str to convert that list into a string. So let's see if this works. Oh, nope, it failed. So lambda takes 0 positional arguments, but was given 1. Okay, so that makes sense. So even though we discard that that parameter that comes into always return star, we actually have to accept that because the map function here is going to take each character of the string and pass it to always return star. So even if we're discarding that, we have to, just like before, do an underscore ch or call this some variable name. Even if we're not using it, we need to accept it because we need to follow the contract that map asks for. And now we're getting a list of characters. Expected this, and we're getting a list of characters, which is weird because we are okay. So turning a list into a string is actually just creating the string representation of that. So we probably need something a little bit more advanced, like string.join to join the characters of a string together. But to be honest with you, I'm not sure that I can know that without looking it up. So I'm going to do str join Python and see what we can find here. So string join is just on the string value. The string value, we're just going to, it is a string object, so we can call its we can call a method on it with .join, and so this would join. Let's try this to see what it does. So this is going to join these 3 things in this tuple, which is kind of like a list, with the hash character. So if we want to join it with nothing, we would just do the empty string .join and then our list. So do something like, whoa, okay, we don't need that. Let's go back into full screen here. So we would do something like return empty string, so join with nothing, dot join, and then we pass in our collection, which I wonder if it'll just let us use our map on its own, because it might be okay with using a map object instead of having to turn that into a list first. So I'm going to use control question mark to comment that out and then see if we can do it this way. And it passes. So now we didn't need to turn it into a list first, because join is already going to have to go through each thing inside of the collection, which is in this case a map object. And so it doesn't need it to be all spread out into a list before it joins. So this was a bit more advanced, but you can see how actually this entire function could be just condensed into something as short as this. So we can just paste in our function literally instead of giving it a name first. Now this is not as readable of code, but you'll see this should work just fine with a single line of code, whereas those other approaches took maybe 4 or 6 lines of code. So a bit harder to follow, but this is how maybe I would optimize the size of the code, even if it's not quite as readable in this case. Consider the following program that prints a page number on the left or right side of a page. Define and use a new function isEven that returns a Boolean to make the condition in the if statement easier to understand. Okay, so this is kind of what we were just talking about, is like looking at code that's not very readable and then changing it to make it more understandable and readable. So page mod 2 or %2 is asking, does the number of the page, does dividing it by 2 leave a remainder that is equal to 0? And dividing numbers by 2 and having a remainder equal to 0 is the same thing as saying, is that number even? If I divide 6 by 2, I get a remainder of 0. If I divide 11 by 2, I get a remainder of 1, so it's not even. And that holds true for all even and odd numbers. So I'm just going to take this and command or control X, and then I will say if is even, which is what they want us to call that variable name. So then we will give that Boolean a name, isEven is equal to the value of the control V, the value evaluating this expression. Does page mod 2 equals 0? Put the answer into isEven as a Boolean, and then if isEven, print page. So I believe that's all we need to do here. You must define the function isEven. Okay, I misunderstood. Yep, I didn't even read the instructions. Define and use a new function isEven. So instead of it as being just a variable, they want us to define a function. This could be a lambda function or a def function. So the simple way would be def isEven. Instead of just being a variable here, it's going to be def isEven can take any number, which number might be a reserved word in Python. So isEven value, let's call it, which is a, it seems like this is always going to be an int, so I'll say the value. Optional type annotation here is to say value, which will be an int, and this function will also optional return a Boolean. And Boolean is not, in some languages it's Boolean, and in Python it's just bool. And then colon, new line, tab over, it automatically tabbed over for me, will be returning the answer of whether page mod 2 is 0, except it's not going to be page, it's going to be, in this case, value, just a different name that we gave to whatever is being passed in. So copy value, replace is value mod 2 0, given any particular value. And then here we will just call the function isEven with parentheses, and here we need to pass in what we want the value to become for this evaluation down here. So in this case, it's going to be the page. We're going to isEven page. We get the answer, then we do the if statement. And it looks happy with this. The only thing, again, I would personally, because of conciseness, especially for how short this function is, I would typically use a lambda function for this. I also, if they will let us, I would probably put it outside of the main definition because it keeps me closer to the left, which is more readable. So even just moving this right here, it's still going to be in scope because the global scope is bigger than the function scope. So this is still going to be working even if it's not allowed. Seems like it's allowed. And then the other thing I would do is I would just make this a lambda function just for readability as well. Depending on who's your reader, this could be less readable, but it's a little bit more concise. So isEven is the name of a function, so a lambda, and that lambda should take a value, and I don't think you can actually annotate types in a lambda because you need that colon for something else. So I'll just say lambda v or lambda x, and does x mod 2 equals 0. And so instead of value here, I'm giving it a different name for that parameter. So I'll just do x and x. So same thing. Is even is a function that takes x and returns the answer of whether x mod 2 is 0. And they don't like that. So just to get passing and move on, I'm just going to make, I guess I'll just undo. Or I'm mad that they won't let me do it, so I'm just going to do something crazy that you should never do. I'm going to say, here's my lambda function, return lambda function called with value. This is completely unnecessary because the lambda, it should be able to behave as the function, but they don't want me to be happy, so I'll do that. Consider the following program that counts the number of spaces in a user-supplied string. Modify the program to define and use a function count spaces instead. Number of spaces in a user-supplied string. Use a function. Okay, so def main user input. We take in a string, and that the type of an input returns a string. So user input is a string. Spaces starts at 0 for char or character in user input. If the character is a space, then increment spaces and then print spaces at the end. So we want the to define count spaces instead. So there is like a Python function for counting the number of times that something like a space happens inside of there. So we can figure that out to maybe make it a little bit better later. But for now, we can just move this stuff to a function. And they want it to call count spaces. So we'll say def count spaces is going to take in a user supplied string. We'll call that string is the name and str is the optional type annotation that tells our readers of our function what our function is meant to take. So they are less likely to make a mistake and pass a number in or something. And this arrow says optionally, we're optionally annotating our function to describe that it should return a int, in this case, integer. I think it's an int. Number. Int. Number is a different language. So these two pieces are optional, the string and the int annotation. And we'll just say that count spaces does basically this portion here. Control X, Control V. And the only difference is user input is not defined here, so we'll have to Control C, Control V, replace for char and string, increment spaces, and then the function at the end should return spaces. And then here, we just want this to print count spaces, Control C, count spaces, but that's just the name of function. We actually have to call the function, and the function makes no sense if we pass nothing into it, so we have to pass in the user input. And it looks like we passed now. I would go and I would fix this. I happen to know just from experience that Python has a way to count the number of characters in a string. So I know if I can get the string and the character I want to look for, there should be a function for that I can look up. So I could ask Google, or I could ask AI, or I could look up in the Python documentation. So let's just look that up. Python count character, certain character in string, specific character in string. And it is just string.count that character. So the more optimal, because Python might even have some optimization in their implementation of this that does something a bit more advanced and potentially is faster. It's also going to be way more readable for people to see that. So I just literally have this, with this template, I can copy this and then modify it for my needs. So I just say return, instead of sentence.count, I will comment this right here out, actually. Let's undo it in case they complain. I'll just comment this out with highlight control slash and then paste sentence.count, except in this case it's going to be string.count. So I just can't blindly copy that. I need to adapt it for my needs. String.count, and instead of A, it's going to be the space character. Enter a string. I didn't return. So I said string.count inside of the function, and Python calculated that, and then it returned. When you have no return statement, it just does return none. That's what it does, and none is just nothing. It's just a special type for nothing. So if I don't have a return, that's what I'm going to get by default. So I need to say return the value of running string.count on with the parameter of the space character, the argument of the space character. And there we'll get the same result. But you can see now this code is a bit smaller. And again, if I were to do this, first of all, I would probably just call string.count down here. Down here, I would just say print string.userinput.count space. But if I had to define this, I would also probably use a lambda function in this case instead of a def, because I just visually, for me, to be over to the left side of the editor and to just have a one-liner is more visually appealing and easier to read for me. Some people would prefer to see this in this indented format. And I think that is the last question. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.